I'm just going to. So welcome to week 3 of our spring reset. And I'm just going to share the screen and see. Okay. So that you can actually see what we're covering this week. And I will go to the full screen version because I think it's a little bit easier to see it on Zoom.
Lovely.
And, you know, at the moment, I think, I don't know if anyone noticed with the winds yesterday, how much there was. And it does get that pollen moving through the environment. And I was talking to another client yesterday who has been doing my testing where we look at it's called 500 foods, and you do it with a hair test. And she was actually noticing that for the first time in years, her allergies weren't like she was seeing all the ads for Telfast and all those sort of things. And she realized that she wasn't actually using it the way she used to, because having got on the right foods and supported her microbiome, she wasn't having the same level of allergic response. So that was really pleasing. So what I wanted to cover now was, most people think about, you know, toxins in terms of what they're eating and drinking, but there are other sources that you need to be aware of. And I think one of the, I did a session with a building biologist once looking at all the things from an environmental perspective you need to be aware of. But one of the sayings she had was, have a filter or be the filter. And that always really stuck with me. And she was talking about water filters in that sense. But I have to say, through the bushfires and everything, I actually had an air filter. And I had an air filter because we had a mold problem in our house. And what I noticed was when the bushfires were going, running the, and you know, that smoke was really bad, running the air filter in the house made such a difference to the quality of the air in the house. And also when we changed the filter, it was just horrendous. There's a kind of cloth layer around it, and you've got the new one, which is all white and bright, and then you've got the old one, which is a horrible shade of gray and is encrusted with all this stuff, and you realize just circulating. Yeah, I know, it's really unpleasant. So I was looking at personal care products, cooking products, because, you know, how you cook and prepare your food can make a difference too. And then just looking more generally at the environment and a couple of other ideas for de-stressing your brain. So we're looking at, today, we're looking at personal care products, sources in the kitchen, and environmental sources. So first up, looking at the personal care products. It's a really good idea to read labels. It can be really difficult because I often think they set it up so that the label is about, you know, when you look at the font, it's like it's 7 font and it's impossible to actually read the damn thing. But realistically, there's over 300 chemicals that are in daily use. And a lot of the products where we might test things in food or supplements, we don't necessarily have the same level of testing for personal care products. So it's a really good idea to look at what's in them. And many years ago, I saw this young girl and she was only 19. And when I did the testing I used, she came up with a really high level of aluminium. And her presenting symptom was she had this red raised skin all around her neck. And it was just really an unusual sort of presentation. It wasn't all over her body. It was just this area here. Anyway, when we did the testing, she came up with incredibly high aluminium. And I'm talking, you know, the range is like this. She was over here. And the testing I used has it in sort of green, yellow, red, and hers was clearly very elevated and red. And when I was looking, I got her to go through all of personal care products. And what came up was aluminium was really high. She was using a fake tan every day. And I really don't know why, because she had the most beautiful kind of porcelain skin, but she wanted to be tan because she was 19 years old. And it was about 74% aluminium salts. So that really high aluminium was coming, and she'd use this product every day for about 2 years. So the first thing I do always is get rid of that product, because, you know, if you can remove the sources, it's going to be much faster to get a resolution. We did the express detox with her, and afterwards she was fine. So it really cleared up beautifully. But I mean, removing the source is kind of the #1 tip I would have. So have a look at those personal care products. It's amazing how often you find other things in there. in kind of like the 15th and 16th century, women used to whiten their face with lead. It was really successful at whitening their face, but left them with a whole bunch of other symptoms. And then, I don't know if you know, in the Mona Lisa, how she's got these really large pupils. Women used to drop belladonna in their eyes to make the pupils really large. So women have done some really amazing things for the sake of beauty. And a lot of these things were actually quite toxic. And I'm not sure people realize the effect it was having. But a lot of personal care products, it's a good idea to have a look for some of the ones that are safer and cleaner. So one of the brands I use is called Simplicite, and it's spelt S-I-M, it's spelt like simplicity, but with an E at the end. And they have a website, but it's run by a beautiful herbalist and his wife up in Queensland. They grow a lot of their own products, and it's really lovely, clean products. And it's amazing how good your skin feels using it. There's a couple of other really good quality ones out there. I think Gwyneth Paltrow has a range, that vegan, cruelty-free, et cetera, but it's a really good idea to have a look and see what's in those products, because it can make a big difference to your health. Personally, I really struggle if someone comes into clinic and they've actually been using a lot of perfume. And I was having a treatment a few days ago from another practitioner, and she'd obviously just, sprayed a lot of it around herself, and it was just making me cough. And at the moment, you don't want to be coughing because everyone looks at you like you're a plague beast. So, the other thing to be careful with is scent overload, because a lot of those have substances in them. I'd prefer people to use something like essential oils. They're beautiful aromas, they're natural, they've come from, and it's amazing the combinations you can have. Just dab a couple of those on pulses and you get a really lovely scent. Now, you don't tend to think of a kitchen as a major source. Sorry.
Too fast. Can I ask something?
Sure.
Well, not ask something.
Absolutely.
Can I mention something?
Yep.
You remember when you tested me a few years back and I had the aluminium issues? One of the things that you pulled me up on was my deodorant. Do you want to maybe deodorants?
And there's a few. There's one called Black Chicken, which is an actual paste that you can use. There's a couple of Leader that do some beautiful deodorant sprays, like in a little bottle.
Because you said deodorants were notoriously high in aluminium, didn't you? As compared to other things.
They use them as an antiperspirant. So that's probably the most common product. And I actually had a colleague make me up a lemongrass and coconut underarm deodorant, which is really effective. Coconut
that
oil.
Sounds delicious.
Yeah, I know it does.
You'd be licking your own armpits.
At least if you smell sweaty, you smell of lemongrass rather than anything else. But yeah, that's probably one of the other common things. And the other thing is a lot of medications actually use some trace aluminium salts in them too. Now, they're probably at very small levels, but if you're using something long-term, it can build up over time.
Emily's asked a question in the chat as well.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Are there any other main toxic ingredients we're looking for? Good question. Look, I think most of us know about things in shampoos like parabens, etc. I'd say ideally what you want to do is minimize your use of, if you can, have things in glass rather than plastic, because we're all getting trace plastic exposure from water bottles and other sources. And a lot of products are actually using microplastics in them to make them fluffy. So, and the most common one was actually washing machine powder. They put microplastics in to make it fluffy, but some other personal care products do as well. So I just look at the brand and see what they were doing and how they're and what it contains, and do a little bit of research and try a few different things. So I think the other one that's quite good is Dr. Hauschka's. That's quite clean. But you could, and there's another, in terms of shampoos, I think Alchemy and Akin do some pretty clean ones, but I've been using one by a company called, it's kind of out there, it's called Gypsy Rose, and it's main ingredients are apple cider vinegar and kombucha. So it smells a bit interesting when it comes out of the bottle, but it's amazingly good for the color. And what you find is after a few uses, you need to wash your hair less often. So it actually is working on creating a good microbiome on your head as well. So this was a product I was recommended for people with psoriasis in the hair, but I thought I'd give it a try because I really liked the environmental aspect of it. And so she also does really large bottles so that you don't need to, you order those instead of refilling the smaller bottle to just try and cut down her waste and her footprint. So the Gypsy Rose is probably the other one to have a look at because, yeah, shampoos often contain a lot of toxins. And I've had people who've had rashes here and it's been because of the shampoo, because when you wash your hair, it comes down onto the forehead and, really irritates it. Now, with the hair testing I use for 500 foods, they can also test you can send off individual samples. You just need a little plastic bag. And I think it's about $7 each. And you can test any other products you're using to make sure that it's okay for you. They do have a really large list, which includes the Alchemy and Akin and a whole bunch of other products, skin and hair care products. But it can be a good way just to check. And look, I'd be particularly suspicious if you're prone to rashes and skin problems, that there's something in your personal care routine that is problematic. Now, Cheryl might like to fess up about alfoil too. Now that we've gone to the kitchen products.
Yes. So how long ago was it, Chris? It was probably 3 or 4 years now.
Yeah.
I don't remember. It's a while ago. I did the, what's it called? Test.
The oligo scan.
The oligo scan, which tests all your mineral levels and things. And my aluminium was really high. My deodorant was one of the things that we worked out was contributing. But the other thing was that whenever I was cooking in the oven, I was using alfoil, so I didn't have to clean the cookware all the time. I'd always put alfoil on the bottom, or tinfoil if you're from New Zealand. And I didn't realise that was actually putting aluminium into the food, and therefore I was basically ingesting a certain amount every time I did this, and I'd been doing it for years. So I was banned by Christine from ever using that anymore. Well, now I use either my tray itself or baking paper. Yep. And it's all good.
Yep. So, that's one thing to be aware of, because I think there were quite a few recipes that involved using alfoil to cook things in. And particularly, I used to have one for fish where you put lemon juice and ginger on it. And that was really nice. It kind of steamed it in the little package. But of course, the acid in the lemon juice was liberating some of the aluminium. So what I do now is I put it in a Corningware dish and I put the lid over it. So it's not quite the same seal, but it's similar and it creates the same sort of thing. So it's really important. Ideally, what you use for cookware is stainless steel or cast iron, just making sure that it's the stainless steel coating. And be a little bit careful of those non-stick coatings because a lot of them are not ideal either. They can be a little bit toxic. They do make life a lot easier from other aspects. And when you're storing, either look at putting things in BPA-free plastic, or I actually found this really great range from Tupperware, which had glass containers, but with a snap lock lid on it. So there was a little bit of plastic in it, which was BPA-free, but the actual container that the food was sitting in was in glass. So ideally, you're using glass as much as possible or other containers. And in the kitchen, you need to make sure that mold starts growing on food and it's not visible fairly quickly. So if you are eating leftovers, make sure that you use it within 48 hours of cooking and you don't leave it out for a long period on the bench beforehand. Leave it out for long enough to cool down, but don't leave the lasagna in the oven overnight and then 12 hours later get it out and put it in the fridge, because it will start to grow mold fairly quickly. The other toxin to look out for is BPA in cans. So it's a plasticizer. So when you get the can and it's got a white lining, instead of having that sort of tin lining, that can be because they have used a plastic with BPA. Increasingly, people are not using that as much. and or they will say that it's BPA free plastic. And the issue with plastic is that it is a carcinogen if you're ingesting it, and it's a little, you know, it's actually kind really useful way of storing things, but it's not designed for storing hot foods or long-term storage. So just be a bit careful about what's in a lot of your storage mechanisms. And as much as possible, I used to use a lot of canned tomatoes, but now I use passata because it comes in a glass jar. Julie?
Yeah, Cheryl was first.
Oh, that's all right, you go.
One of the things they've found plastics in is, you know, the little individual cups of rice you can buy?
Yeah.
And you put them in the microwave?
Yeah.
Which are really handy if you're in a hurry. Apparently they've found lots of plastic particles in those.
I get those because I live on my own and they're the perfect size for one person.
I know.
Oh no. Okay, I'll stop that.
What I would suggest is make up a batch of rice and freeze it.
Can you freeze rice?
Yeah,
yes,
absolutely.
Oh, I've never thought to freeze rice.
And then that way you're kind of doing, you know, you do 2 cups and that's giving you 4 serves.
Yeah.
Then you've got it there handy when you need it.
I never would have thought in a million years to freeze rice. I would have just assumed it would go yuck.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It actually keeps, I mean, you look at a lot of the stuff that's in freezer meals, and rice is a key component. It does actually freeze quite well.
Yeah, I freeze it for a lot. If I've got to do a lot of fried rice in case I've got it, like if a crowd coming, I will often make it before and freeze it. What you shouldn't do with rice is leave it out.
Yeah, because it bacterializes
put it in
really
the fridge
quickly,
and reheat it the next day. It's better off being frozen.
Yeah. Chris, I was going to ask if Tupperware is BPA free, if you know offhand.
The more recent ones are, but if you've got really old Tupperware, because the damn stuff is hard to kill, possibly not.
Okay. So recent as in last 10 years?
Probably the last 5 years that I'm confident about.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'd just go back and ask them because, you know, they've got pretty good records.
Yeah.
Now, I've just realised that, I wonder if I can do this. Oh, yes, I can. I've just dragged and dropped you all because you're all sitting in front of the slide. I don't know how it's appearing on your screen, but now, environmentally, there's a number of toxins you can be exposed to. And, you know, there's more or less really good information about this out there. But one of the ladies I follow, and I've actually been to a lot of her presentations and read her book, is a woman called Nicole, and her surname is just impossible to spell. It's Bilisma, which I think is Bijlisma. So if anyone's, it's a bit like Berejiklian, really. And, you know, not that easy to say or spell, but she focused a lot on things like electromagnetic radiation and mold, and looking at designing your house so that it's actually environmentally friendly and you've got really good indoor air. And it's amazing how many things we use in the home that give off emissions, but to really, there's some very simple ways you can improve the environment at home. And probably the biggest one is take your shoes off at the door. So you know how most Asian families would have a rack by the door and put their shoes on it? There's a really good reason. They bring in 50% less dust and dirt.
Oh, so there's a plus side to lockdown.
There is definitely a plus side to lockdown. If you're never going out, you're not bringing the dirt in. But, you know, just something that simple can actually mean that you're actually reducing the amount you're tracking into the house. The other thing that I'd say is really critical is making sure your airflow is good. And a lot of houses in Sydney are built on slopes, and they may be even built against the rock walls. So they may not necessarily have good airflow, and particularly underground ventilation. And it does make a real difference, because what you don't want to have happen is if you do get water coming through walls or anything else, you want it to dry out quickly and not build up mold in there, because mold is really, and look, some molds are just really useful and they break down materials and create compost for the soil, and that's great. But other molds can be really toxic for human health and create all sorts of respiratory problems. And there's a condition called CIRS, which is chronic inflammatory respiratory syndrome, which causes a lot of really chronic, kind of almost like, you know, like a lung disease. for people. And it's because of exposure to some of the black molds and the other nasties. So if you do have mold in your environment, it's really important to have it treated and remediated appropriately. Now, about 2 years ago, we had a window cleaner come and work on our upstairs windows, and he broke a number of tiles so that when we had the next big downpour of rain, and look, you know, the tiles were 40 years old and probably needed replacing. So I'm not sure it's all his fault, but we had water coming into a front room, and I started noticing that I was having a bit of trouble breathing, or, you know, that I just was finding it really uncomfortable in that room every time I went in there. We had a building biologist come in and do swabs, and it turned out that all the insulation material in the roof above that room was contaminated with mold. So we had to have that all removed and replace the ceiling in that room, which was a really expensive job. So what I would recommend is just make sure your roof's well sealed. You know, don't go the other aspect. And I have to say, it made a real difference when I got the mold sorted out, and I noticed that my allergies weren't as bad either for quite a while after it. So that and the air filter made a big difference. Julie?
We've got an underground ventilation, and that's fantastic. But I've also got this little thing here called Stellar Dome, and that's Stellar Dome.
Mm-hmm.
And it's supposed to counteract the effects of mold. I mean, it's best to get rid of it, but sometimes, some places just don't. So that's supposed to give off, I think mold gives off a positive, and it's also good for electromagnetic fields, radiation, mold, and it just gives off, mold and electromagnetic fields give off a positive vibe.
Ion? Is it ion?
I think,
okay.
And it gives off a negative one, which is what the body needs. So
okay, yeah, and look,
that's good. So I hope,
that's actually interesting. I'm going to have a look at that after we finish this talk, because I'm really interested. You know, I found that I think I've got the level of mold down that came into that room, but I'm not 100% convinced I've dealt with it all. So, you know, I think it would still be good. I mean, it's hard to tell because it's an old California bungalow, and they do tend to be a bit colder and feel a bit damp. I don't know.
And your dehumidifier's been trapped at Cheryl's house since before lockdown.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
So you can't even put that on to test.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and Julie gave me a really good lead into it, is electromagnetic radiation. So ideally, don't live in a house next to a substation or high intensity power lines. Now, you know, there's the jury's kind of out on this, but I always remember many years ago, my husband was working in satellite TV, and they knew then that if you went out on Centrepoint Tower, if a male went out on Centrepoint Tower without shielding, he would become infertile within about 20 minutes, because they had so many transmitters there just blaring out all this electromagnetic radiation. Now, one of the things you can do, assuming you're avoiding, you know, you're not living next to a substation, you don't have high intensity power lines over your head. And, you know, when I'm talking about those, I mean the ones that, you know, you see those really big ones on the, you know, as you're driving up the highway or something, you can see them, you know, with 6 or 12 lines strung up them transmitting power. You want to be avoiding being too close to that area. I think with TV antennas, he said you want to be at least 500 meters away from them before that, so that they've actually dispersed enough of the radiation. And the other thing you can do, which is really interesting, is if you have fly screens on your windows that are made out of metal, that actually repels some of the electromagnetic radiation as well. In fact, if you've got really good fly screens, you might discover that your Wi-Fi is not working as well. Yeah. Now, the other thing I would recommend is do not sleep with phones in the bedroom, because then you've got radiation going around your head. Even if you put it on flight mode, it's still a level of it. So as much as possible, keep those things in another room. And if you're using it as an alarm, if the alarm's going off in another room and you have to get up to answer it, it will work really well as an alarm clock, as long as it's not too far away and you can't hear it. But I really have a set against people having too much radiation and Wi-Fi around their heads while they're trying to sleep. I think you need to give yourself a break at least when you're trying to sleep. So that's just a couple of things I wanted to mention about the environmental exposures. The other one, I was just going to show you the what the minerals tool measures. So you may recognize this test from previously because I had
mine.
you use it.
This is my old one.
And you can see the
Look
high
at my
aluminium
aluminium.
there.
It was so bad.
Well, we'll have to see. We'll have to redo it at some point and see
Oh, it won't be.
what the levels are
It will
like.
be so much better now.
Yeah. Well, let's hope.
We did do it, didn't we? Didn't we do a retest? I thought we did.
I'm not sure we have, but this was the one I had on the screen. But what I like about the oligoscan testing is it gives me nutrient minerals as well. So it looks at the 20 minerals that are really important for function, and it gives me an idea where they sit in the range. Now, I might do other testing based off this, but it's just a really helpful confirmation with other signs and symptoms, and a lot easier than doing a whole range of blood tests. This is spectrometer analysis. So spectrometer analysis, basically every element on the spectrum has a different color. So it takes 4 photographs and then it interprets that. And the only reason it does 4 on the palm is so that it can calibrate it against the others. So the last thing I wanted to cover off in terms of detoxing was 6 days of strategy to actually try and detox your brain. Now, I'm going to say, I don't expect you to do all of them every day. I just want you to perhaps look at one of these that you can commit to for a week. So the first one is turn your phone on Do Not Disturb for an hour. Now, I wish I'd done that because obviously someone's messaging me on Messenger at the moment. It keeps beeping. So, oops.
It's me sending you photos. Sorry.
Oh, is it? Okay.
I will refrain.
Okay, won't refrain. The one I find most helpful is the walking in nature for 20 minutes. I have discovered a whole range of really beautiful walks around our area. Having to be in that LGA of, stay in your LGA or within 5 kilometres. I've loved Lane Cove River Park. And in fact, my son went down there with a friend on the weekend and they did a 10-kilometre walk. Like they went up from the bottom of Lane Cove River Park all the way up to De Burgh's Bridge and back, which was a little bit more than I like about 4 or 5K. I find that's about enough for me. 10K was a bit of a challenge. The other options are meditating for 10 minutes. And I don't know if I mentioned the app Gaia, but I think the other one that's really good is Calm. And I don't know if anyone else has a favorite one. But those apps have often really useful little meditations, but also the other advantage is that you can set the time limit you want. So you can do from 5 to 10 minutes. But I have to say, last week, number one son, who's back from Canada, yay, was really stressing me out because he wasn't getting onto all the things I wanted him to organize. And so I went back to meditating every morning. So I was a little bit less pushy and calmer when dealing with him. And I do find within 2 to 3 days, I notice the difference. The other thing that could be really good just to get us all through this last week of being restricted is preparing and eating your meals mindfully. And by that, I mean, actually enjoy the process of preparing the meal, engage with it, get all the ingredients out. I mean, what I actually like to do is I like to get the whole family involved in cooking or in preparing the meal. I find that 1, it really shortens the time involved, and 2, then it feels like I can really enjoy it. And then what we've been doing is using our deck, which is covered and sitting out there so that we can really enjoy the meal. So what I would challenge you to do is maybe just make an effort with 1 meal this week. Another option is just connecting with a friend. You could do a Zoom like we're doing. I think Facebook Messenger is brilliant. I think it's easy. If you do it on the computer, you can actually see the person rather than this little face. And if nothing else on that list attracts you, then I want you to just breathe in for 4, hold for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 4, and repeat that as needed, just to see how it settles your adrenals. Did anyone have any other suggestions that add to that list? No? Any favorite meditation apps?
I would say anything that, if you can't meditate in the normal way, which some of us can't because our brains are too overpowered or hyperactive, whatever you want to call it. Any activity that zones your brain into it will give you the same effect. So, for example, yoga is great because if you don't focus, you fall over. So your brain is completely in your body, which means it's actually meditating because it's focused on a single thing. If you're a puzzle person, when you're doing a puzzle, that is quite meditative if you enjoy puzzles. If you don't, it's the opposite. But if you do enjoy puzzles, that's because it's quite a meditative experience if your brain is focused in on that puzzle. Adult colouring is another really good one. So if you're not someone that can do the hum and, you know, do it that way, then try some of those other type activities that where your brain has to focus on that single activity. It's actually giving it a big rest.
Yep, Julie?
I was on some medication that was, I could go to sleep fine, but I would wake up in the night for a couple of hours at a time. And then somebody told me, and as soon as I'd wake, my brain was going like a million miles an hour. So what you do is you go through and you go, starting with A, you go through the suburbs in Sydney. So you might go with Allambie Heights, Annandale, Annangrove, then you go on to B. In the end, what I had to do, because you'd be surprised how many suburbs start with the letter C. I limited myself to 10 or 20.
Okay.
And then I'd move on to the next letter. And that was enough to switch my brain off and I could go back to sleep.
That's like a high-tech version of counting sheep, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, except one friend I told that to, her husband was ready to kill me because she got stuck on some of the letters and she woke him up to ask him. But I still do it now and I find it works really well to just switching the brain off.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a lot of women, particularly postmenopausally, you know, we tend to have this sleep pattern where we go into a sleep and then that light sleep and then, you know, and over time you may have more wakeful periods. So I just find focusing on the breathing, acknowledging that I'm still resting, and then I don't get stressed about it, because I think the worst thing you can do is get stressed about it. And I think your activity stops you getting stressed about it so that you can go back to sleep. But also you're not thinking about some other problem you're trying to brainstorm or solve, because that's clearly not going to help you go back to sleep.
That's another thing that's really good is journaling or gratitude journals or things like that before bed, because it puts your brain in a positive state before you start trying to sleep, which is also really helpful with that as well. So we don't go to bed stressing about all these things we have to do tomorrow. We write them all down before we go to bed, or, you know, do a dump on the day before we actually try and put ourselves into that calmer mode.
Okay, I'm going to just say thank you all for participating in the spring reset.